My dad retired from running the lab equipment company he had started from nothing 2 years earlier. I assumed I would be next in line for years. For over 7 years, he had subtly indicated that I, at 30 years old, would inherit when he retired. I had spent so much of my time developing the company and organizing for this day. Still, I find it haunting what transpired at his retirement celebration. Thinking it would be the time I formally took over the family company, I had planned the celebration myself. Rather, my father handed the mantle, not to me but to my brother-in-law, Zach, as he stepped in front of everyone to make his major news. Zach, at 34, had 2 years of marriage to Lauren, my sister. He had only joined the business around a year ago. I had 7 years of my life working hard, showing my value, and getting ready for the day I would take over. I cheered with everyone else as my dad stood there announcing Zach as the new CEO, but inwardly I was in conflict. I drew my dad aside later that evening to find out why he would pick Zach over me. His response still hurt. Zach was more of a son to him, he added, than I had been, so I had disappointed him. Those remarks really hit me like a gut-grab punch. How then could he say that? I asked him just what precisely disappointed me. His reply was worse than the original hit. Although he informed me it had been a tough choice, he had to act in the best interests of the business. He said I was mentally weak, and it would make me ineffective in leading. He then clarified that he was referring to my anxiety illness, something I had told my family some months before. Generalized anxiety disorder was the diagnosis given to me, hence I wasn't embarrassed of it. But I had to tell my parents about a little container of my anti-anxiety medicine that dropped out of my pocket during dinner that evening. My dad? My mother was sympathetic, but my dad? Not that much. Usually speaking about toughness and how it was the secret to getting through life, he had never been one to believe in mental health difficulties. Following that supper, he began treating me differently, as if my nervousness rendered me less competent. The most hurtful was that worry never interfered with my performance at work. I always took care of my obligations, never allowed my illness to interfere, and put more effort than anybody to show myself. But according to my father, my nervousness indicated weakness. He suggested that turning to medications to cope with it was evidence sufficient that I lacked the strength to lead. Hearing it from him, I understood his meager confidence in me. Not only did he pass me over, but he had been preparing this for some time, knowing Zach would be hired while still allowing me to feel I had a chance. He allowed me to bring soul and heart to the business, just to humiliate me before everyone. I determined that evening that my connection with my father was over and left the celebration early. Indeed, it was his firm, and he was quite entitled to select someone he felt would be ideal for the position. But I couldn't pardon his approach, which led me on and abruptly cut me down. Within a few weeks, I left the firm and began working elsewhere. I kept in touch with just my mother. Lauren never even tried to understand my side when she learned why I was leaving. We got rather hot about it since she seemed to be attacking Zach personally. We last spoke not too long ago. About Zach, I have not personally interacted with him either. He might not have been at fault, but after what occurred, I couldn't bring myself to engage with him. I had avoided the family for the past 2 years, save for the odd visit with my mother. She tries to encourage me to make peace with my dad every time we get together, but I have been clear in my resolve not to. About 1 week ago, I then received a panicked phone from her. Zach had been arrested for tax fraud, she informed me, and my dad was under inquiry as well. Apparently, he was of interest because of his past connection to the firm. If necessary, my mother urged me to get in touch with my dad to help to mend things and testify on his side. Her questions to me astounded me. I wanted nothing to become mired in this quagmire. I made it plain to her that I was not going to stick out my neck for my dad. Had he needed me, he ought to have contacted himself. Not even the courtesy to approach me for aid following all that transpired. Should I be the first one to move? According to my mother, this was a time for the family to gather and I was acting immature. That was, however, an absurd expectation. She found it incomprehensible that my dad's actions had caused such profound damage. And why would I support him now when he had never once expressed regret for what he did to me? The exchange turned into a fight when I told her this was most likely punishment for messing me up. My mother was quiet, then hung up a moment later. Though at the same time that was how I felt guilty about expressing it. angry and wounded, I didn't see why I should be the one to assist the individuals I had thrown aside. Later, I found my mother had blocked me when I tried to contact her to apologize for how the talk turned out. I'm left feeling bad now and wondering whether I went too far. Is it me that is irrational here? After my mom blocked me, a week passed as I struggled with my feelings. Not having her in my life was strange, particularly because she had been the only person I remained in touch with in my family. I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong, but if I claimed I didn't feel a tinge of remorse over how the previous talk concluded, I would be lying. Still, I couldn't get rid of the belief that what I mentioned was warranted. It was not as if my father had committed a minor error. He shattered my soul, undermined me, and made me feel inadequate for 7 long years, only to toss me aside at last. It was how hard I worked despite the worry that characterized me. I know what I have to offer and that I am competent, but it lingers with you when your own father advises you you're weak and unsuitable. His statements undermined my confidence. It took months of treatment for me to even begin to feel normal once more. Over those 2 years, I rebuilt myself, cut off the negative, and developed my ability to depend on my own power. I wanted none at all to sink back into the poisonous quagmire my family had produced. For this reason, even though Zach and my dad were in danger, I informed my mother I was not getting involved. Their issues were not ones I could resolve. I had nothing to owe them, and I wanted to avoid being sucked into their legal muck. Still, I carried a residual gloom. It was difficult to digest the thought that the only family I had left was now entirely out of my life. Several days later then, something unanticipated occurred. Lauren, my sister, dropped by my door. Not since the dispute over my quitting the firm, 2 years had I seen her. She looked like she was in a poor state, yet I nearly wanted to refuse to let her in. Her eyes were crimson as if she had been sobbing for hours, and she looked desperately, something I had never seen before. She first sat calmly when I allowed her inside. A few minutes later, she started weeping once more. She fell down when I asked her what was going on, insisting she knew nothing about the scam Zach had been involved in. She was terrified out of thin air. She apparently knew nothing about what would happen to him. The allegations seemed to be serious, federal level. But at that point, things started to change in a way I never anticipated. She informed me our dad had requested her to come see me as he thought I may be of value. My parents suggested perhaps I might go to one of my managers at my present company and find a way to get Zach out of this jam. She claims one of them is married to a federal judge. Tears welling up, Lauren implored me to at least try. What I was hearing defied belief. My family still considered me as someone they might exploit for their own advantage, notwithstanding all that had transpired. Now they were asking me to sacrifice my name and job to save Zach after I had left the company and the family turmoil to rebuild my life. I was unable to do it. I gently informed Lauren I would not be able to assist. Not only did I not bring this up with my superiors, that was not something I would have even given thought to. I value reputation so much that I cannot connect myself with a family caught in fraud. I cautioned her not to jeopardize her job for Zach or anybody else. Lauren's expression contorted in shock, as if she could not grasp how I could say no. She began accusing me of still carrying resentment at Zach for assuming the CEO post. Before things got hot, I cut her off as I could tell where this was headed. To her, plainly, this was not about that. Actually, I did not even hold Zach responsible for what transpired in those days. My dad picked him, not his fault. That was the decision made by my father. I had already adjusted to that. I hadn't come to grips with how my family had treated me thereafter. Lauren came back at my door not to check on me, but rather to beg for anything. She had battled with me about this instead of supporting me, and even now. She became defensive and argued that our mother was right. I was petty and self-serving for not supporting the family when its greatest need. They always pushed this story, which painted me as the bad person for not caving into their demands. Things grew hot quickly, and before I knew it, we were arguing. I told her at last to go. I was not going to stand there and let insults from the very individuals who had left me when most needed. When she initially arrived, I had attempted to be there for her emotionally, but it was obviously not what she wanted. Saying some terrible words beneath her breath, she hurried out. At that time, I had no idea. I recently finished. I felt sapped when she departed. Emotionally, the conflict had worn me out. Her saying such things stung, but I knew deep down she was mistaken. I was not self-serving in safeguarding myself. Having gone through enough, I was not ready to let them pull me down once more. Simultaneously, though, it hurt to consider that the family I had loved and looked for had become strangers. Lauren and I used to be close, and at one point our family made me proud. Those recollections seemed like a lifetime ago now. How things had grown so awful confused me. I kept wondering if it was time to at last break connections for good, or if it was worth clinging on to the meager hope I had left for my family. I sat at my apartment that evening feeling more confused than I had ever done. Though the reality had become something terrible, part of me yearned to let go of the past and go forward, missed the concept of family. One thing, though, was clear to me regardless of how much I missed them. I was not going to let them exploit me, not once again. After the confrontation with Lauren, a few days went by, and I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would finally leave me alone. I should have nevertheless known better. One morning, absolutely unannounced, my folks walked up at my home. I have no idea what they may be there for either. Something with them always, some fresh issue or need. Like I had with Lauren, my immediate impulse was to order them to go. More drama wasn't appealing to me, and to be honest, I felt as though nothing remained to say. But my dad spoke before I could turn them away. He declared he was not coming to make demands or seek assistance. Here he was meant to apologize. That froze me in my tracks. In front of me, correcting, apologizing. That was first. Not sure what to say, I remained there silently and let him go on. He said he had screwed very badly. He acknowledged that what he did to me, passing me over for the CEO post, was bad. He said he hadn't really understood until everything collapsed with Zach and the firm. He had damaged me. He clarified that his choice of Zach was motivated by anxiety, that which I lacked the strength to manage under pressure. He claimed he understood he had been mistaken, even if at the time he felt he was acting morally. He continued, saying he had been indoctrinated growing up to believe males had to be tough and unbreakable. Anxiety wasn't an option. Weakness wasn't a choice. It was only a means of avoiding effort. He said he became afraid when I informed him about my anxiousness. It indicated, he reasoned, I was not suited to run the company he had started from nothing. Zach therefore felt like the safer choice, in his opinion. But he knew he had been stupid now, looking at the wreckage that choice had produced. I listened, still not sure what I should feel. Hearing my dad own his error was startling on one hand. Conversely, I could not help but feel as though it was too little, too late. 2 years had gone by. 2 years he might have reached out, attempted at atonement. Nevertheless, he hadn't. Not until now, when everything was collapsing for him and he had to face his errors without option. I told him I valued the apology after he finished speaking, but I wasn't ready to pardon him. Not quite yet. That wasn't quite straightforward. He could not simply apologize and hope I would forget all the suffering he had caused. He had termed me a disappointment, and those 2 years of eating away at my confidence had kept those comments with me. I could not readily dismiss it. I also noted that Zach most likely wouldn't be standing here apologizing to me if this had not happened, and thus stung. I needed time to decide whether his apology was sincere or only a means of clearing his conscience because he was in a dilemma right now. My dad surprised me, not objecting. He nodded, said he understood, and indicated he would be ready to wait. He claimed he would accept any decision I made, whether or not I chose to forgive him. He only wanted me to know he felt bad about his behavior. My mom spoke out after my dad ended. She also said she had behaved impulsively when I informed her I wouldn't be helping the family. She claimed to have been overwhelmed with everything going on and blamed me when she should not have. She said it was unreasonable to ask me to make corrections when I was the one initially offended. Although it was comfort to hear my mother apologize, the damage cannot be undone. She had been the only family member I kept in touch with during the last 2 years, but even she supported my dad throughout trying circumstances. It was difficult to forget she had not stood up for me. She then surprised me by telling me Lauren also wanted to apologize. Lauren apparently came to see, following our argument, that her treatment of me had been inappropriate. Lauren wasn't ready to meet me just yet, my mother stated, though. She was still juggling Zach's legal problems, and the weight of it all was starting to wear her down. Still, my mother reassured me that Lauren felt bad about the way things had gone between us, even with everything going on. Lauren's second-hand apology lacked moving power. She could have come to me personally if she genuinely wanted to apologize. I informed my mother that unless Lauren personally apologized, I would not see it as a sincere apology. Though I knew she had a lot on her plate, it did not justify her treatment of me. I informed my folks I needed time after our rather longer conversation. I never knew whether I would be able to forgive them either. Still, I valued their coming to atone. Respectful of my desire for privacy, they left shortly after. That evening I was conflicted. I had at last heard the apology I had been waiting for, first in 2 years, but I became even more perplexed rather than relieved. I could not truly pardon them. And should I do, will I be exposing myself to additional suffering down the road? I considered everything over the following several days. Huge blunders were committed by my parents. They had nonetheless also owned their faults. Part of me wanted to pardon them and restore some kind of friendship. But the other side of me was afraid I would just wind up hurt once more. Days went by, and I came to see I missed my family. I missed the moments before all the turmoil, before my dad's retirement celebration, before everything turned upside down. Though the actuality of it had been far from flawless, I missed the concept of a family to depend on. At the same time, though, I wasn't sure whether I could once more rely on them. Given everything was falling apart around them, I wasn't sure if their apologies were sincere or only meant to save face. And that compounded the difficulty of the decision. One thing I knew, though, was I wouldn't jump into anything. I had to be on my terms in my own time if I were going to pardon them. Before I was ready, I was not going to allow anyone to force me into a decision. I resolved to go one step at a time for now. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was an opportunity for my family to reconstruct something. Though it would take time, I was not going to let my defenses down too readily. I had discovered the hard way that depending just on them was a mistake I could not afford to repeat. My parents apologized 4 months ago. A lot has transpired since then. I was still debating whether or not I could forgive them and whether or not I really wanted to try to mend a connection when I last posted. When I told them I needed time, they seemed to grasp. At least they thought they did. Still, things always find a way to get more convoluted than you could have imagined. Lauren, my sister, dropped by my house a few weeks following the apologies. I was actually taken aback, as following that intense argument, I never would have imagined she would ever wish to see me once more. She was, however, waiting at my door. I stopped for a second, remembering how awful things got in the last time we spoke. At last, though, I allowed her in. Lauren wasted no time at all. She said apologies, this time personally rather than via our mother. She said she had been wrong to behave the way she had, wrong to support Dad and Zach without even attempting to know how I felt. She claimed she had screamed out because everything in her life, including the situation with Zach and the company, was under control. I was a convenient target. I did not prod her on it. She was going through a lot, and really I lacked the will to keep revisiting past hurts. Her apologizes did not come out exactly. She started, but she did not completely own anything. The same thing I told our parents, I told her. I wasn't ready to forgive just yet. I ran out of extra time. She appeared to understand it, even if I could tell it pained her a little. I simply needed to defend myself. I was not attempting to injure her. Lauren said that all Zach had totally collapsed. She had a divorce petition filed. Zach apparently was facing major legal repercussions, and the fraud scenario seemed far more dire than first believed. She claimed she realized how much she had taken for granted, including our bond as siblings, and that she felt her entire world had collapsed. Though it would take time, she asked whether we might at least aim to be in one another's life once more. Right then, I didn't reply to her. After some thought, I told her I would consider it. She departed. She was clearly hurting, but I was not in a position where I could provide much more than that. I couldn't simply let it all go in one chat. I had spent so long being furious, so long feeling abandoned by the people who were meant to have my back. But her trip did cause me to consider her, our parents, and whether or not I was ready to mend those ties. I visited Lauren a few days later, then had supper with my folks. To say it would be understated, it was the first time we had all sat down together in years. It was awkward. At first, We had little conversation, just the normal catching up, nothing too profound. While it was good to hear those stories, it felt a bit forced when my mom tried to bring up some memories from when we were children. Like we were all acting as though nothing had gone wrong the way it had. My dad asked whether we might chat alone after supper. I consented, knowing this was coming. We left, and he asked me whether I had given his offer of running the business any attention. Now Zach was out of the picture, he added. The post was still vacant, and he wanted me to rethink. Although I could tell he was attempting to right things, I wasn't sure whether assuming the position would be the best one for me. I told him I valued the offer, but wasn't sure whether I wanted to enter that environment once more. I felt tempted, at least occasionally. Having worked so hard for that post, it still hurts to consider that I passed over someone like Zach. Another side of me, though, wasn't sure whether I wanted to be bound to the business anymore. Too much negative blood, too many past hurts. Simply because the job was at last being offered to me, I did not want to accept it. I wanted to make sure that was really what I wanted. Not pushing was my dad's approach. He replied he understood that I could decide over all the time I needed. He mentioned he would stay handling things in the meantime, but should I change my mind, the offer would always be there. I thought about what I wanted a lot after that chat, not only with the business, but with my family generally as well. Should I try to mend these bonds? Was it my desire to once more live beside them? Alternatively, was it better if I stayed far away? Though it was not a simple choice, after much thinking, I opted to go slightly forward. I wasn't going to block them out totally, but I also wasn't willing to jump into anything. We could maintain getting together once a month for supper, and I told my parents we could observe changes in things. Although little, it was something. Though first awkward and stiff, I could sense they were attempting to make up lost time and appeared content with it. I also had some favorable developments in my personal life in the interim. I began dating a good friend I had known for years a few months ago. Though we had always had a close relationship, I never acted on it as I wanted to keep our friendship intact. She moved first, though, and honestly, it's been the finest thing that has happened to me in a very long time. She has been a great assistance to me in negotiating the complex feelings around my family over all of this. She was actually the one pushing me to at least attempt to find some peace and to offer them another opportunity. I'm happy I paid her some attention since she seems right. Maintaining all that bitterness was draining, and I'm beginning to understand if a gradual but progressive route is possible. Things are still well balanced just now. I'm not sure if I should take the CEO post or not, and I'm not totally sure what the future contains for my family. That feels great, though, since I feel for the first time in a long time in charge of my own life, though I'm traveling one step at a time and not sure where this road will lead me. My career, my relationship, and the folks who have always had my back are the things that make me happy, and I will count it a victory if, along the road, I discover I can really forgive my family and mend those ties. I am happy where I am right now, though. I'm letting things develop organically, and am not hurrying to decide anything. And perhaps, just perhaps, there is opportunity for healing following all. Story 2. My cousin's college tuition was covered by Dad, but I was not. He now desires a return to my life. However, I eventually discovered the reason for his actions, and the revelation surprised me. I'm 28 years old, married to Haley, and we recently welcomed a son into our family, our first child, around 2 months ago. We've been dating for a long, and I can honestly say that having our kid was one of the best experiences of my life. We were thrilled, of course, and posted some pictures of him on Facebook. At first, I didn't give it much thought, just happy to flaunt my child. However, in retrospect, I should have known better. My dad and I haven't spoken in about a decade, but for some reason my family photographed and gave him those pictures. It's amusing how some individuals simply don't know how to behave civilly. To clarify why my dad and I don't get along, let me go back a little. It all started when I graduated from high school and I thought my life would become better. I was prepared for university life. Despite not being at the top of the class or anything, I was happy with my marks and eager to go forward. Though I didn't anticipate receiving a handout, I reasoned that my father would at the very least cover my tuition costs because he was doing well for himself. This is the issue. Just a few months younger than I am, my cousin Peter was usually around when I was growing up. Although we were occasionally close, we always had this strange rivalry between us, almost as if we were brothers, because we were essentially reared together. Not really, though. In all honesty, my father appeared to have a special place in his heart for Peter. Over the years, it became increasingly evident, I'm not sure when I observed it for the first time, that Peter had come out on top, anytime my father was involved. Peter's life was not quite simple, though. His parents, my uncle and aunt, had a constant battle to maintain the viability of their cafe. They weren't particularly fond of him. They were just good folks who were always preoccupied with their work. My dad then intervened. In general, he was more present for Peter than Peter's own parents. He would take him out for things and assist with school. I mean, I lived with my dad full-time, so I didn't really think about it at the time. Since my mom left when I was a baby, it has just been the two of us. I suppose I took that to mean that I was his first priority. Whoa, I was incorrect. We had a difficult time in high school together, but I put a lot of effort into maintaining good grades. I was getting along just fine. Actually, better than Peter. Math was where Peter was really having trouble. Peter received assistance from my parents while I spent hours teaching myself. Sometimes I would glance over and see my dad discussing mathematics with him at the kitchen table, and I would wonder why he hadn't done the same with me. But I thought I'd forgive it. Peter, however, needed assistance more. The major explosion didn't occur until after our graduation. At that point, the topic of college came up. I was already anxious about how I was going to pay for it. As previously mentioned, I didn't think my dad would pay for everything, but I did think he would at least partially assist me. I even searched for part-time work and scholarships in an attempt to figure out how to make everything work. Then, I get an enormous surprise from my dad. One evening, while we sat in the living room, I questioned him about college. Just a light discussion. Really, I was prepared to speak regarding the colleges I was considering and my potential major, but before I could say anything more, my father interrupted and said, "Michael, you ought to consider applying for scholarships. I will not have the funds to cover your tuition." I sat there in complete shock. At first, I wasn't sure how to react because I hadn't anticipated that. My dad wasn't impoverished or having difficulties. He was living comfortably and was doing well at work. I was just asking for a little assistance, nothing more. I then questioned him about why. "Why are you unable to assist me? You are aware of my importance to college." He gave a shrug. That's when he told me something that I will always remember. As if it were no big deal, he said, "I'm covering Peter's tuition." Like I ought to have anticipated it. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. I mean, I knew my dad had been lending a hand to Peter's family for a long time. He would occasionally give them a loan to keep their cafe open. However, this is funding Peter's college rather than mine. It resembled a blow to the face. I just sat there astonished, not knowing whether to laugh or scream. There was an unpleasant stillness for a minute, and I questioned why him and not me. "I am your offspring." My father sighed. He told me that Peter's family is going through a difficult moment since he was weary of explaining things to me. I have to assist them because they are unable to pay for him to attend college. Loans for students or scholarships are available. You're going to get it. In addition, you consider Peter to be a brother. You ought to wish to assist him. My blood began to boil at that very instant. I yanked back. "He isn't my sibling. I'm related to him. Why do you behave as though he's your son?" My father's expression froze. He got to his feet, crossed his arms, and gave me a peculiar look. He remarked, "Maybe it's time you find somewhere else to stay if you're going to have that attitude." That concluded everything. My father had made up his mind. I was out because he preferred Peter over me. I didn't even have enough time to fully pack. After gathering a few things, I departed and spent some time staying at a friend's residence. I didn't know what to do next and didn't have a plan. However, I was certain that I would not let my dad's choice to spoil the next few weeks of my life. I frantically looked for a means to cover my tuition. I applied for loans, scholarships, and anything else that came to me, but none of it was successful without my dad's help. I was unable to pay for food, housing, tuition, or other necessities, so I carried out my obligation. I left college before I had even begun because I didn't think it would work for me. It was excruciatingly painful, particularly when Peter was away having the time of his life. My father presented him with a golden spoon. I knew then that my connection with my dad would never be the same. His decision was made, and it wasn't mine. I resolved then and there that I would depend only on myself. I would solve the problem on my own if my own father was incapable of supporting me, and I did precisely that. I had no strategy. I just knew that I would not be returning to my dad's house. I experienced total abandonment. The money was no longer the only consideration. It was the reality that I wasn't the first priority for my own father. He'd made up his mind. Peter made that choice. Not that I had a lot of alternatives. There was no longer any chance of going to college and no fallback. I had to get a job quickly. I couldn't simply lounge on my friend's couch all day. I so began seeking for work. The issue was that, lacking a college degree, the employment I could get wouldn't exactly cover my expenses. All the jobs I could find paid very little or required me to put in ridiculous amounts of overtime for meager pay. But since I was desperate, I grabbed anything I could. I eventually secured a temporary position in a warehouse. Even if the salary was terrible, it was still something. I would be putting in a lot of overtime, working long hours, lifting boxes, and performing various menial tasks. The things you do when you genuinely don't know what else to do. I had no choice but to accept it, even though it was awful. My dad tried to get in touch throughout this period. He texted me once or twice. Nothing too profound, nothing special, just the norm. How are things going for you? You can also return home at any moment. Here's the problem, though. He never made any mention of assisting me with my coursework. He never once offered to assist with his tuition or said, "Let's figure this out." It felt like I was meant to forget about that portion of the talk, as if it had never happened. As if we could resume business as usual without making any repairs. It was not acceptable to me. I decided there was no need in discussing if he couldn't even admit what he had done, so I ignored his texts. How can you just act as like you didn't mistreat your own child? I was unable to go on. My fury would boil every time I imagined Peter leaving to attend college, live in a dorm, and experience campus life while I was stranded in a warehouse. And that decision was made by my dad. But, life goes on. That's what everyone kept telling me anyhow. I made an effort to simply keep my head down and work. However, it wasn't simple. Each day was a struggle. I was barely making ends meet at work, and it was tiring. I was trying to figure out what I was meant to do with my life, and on top of that, I had bills piling up and rent to pay. Since going to college was no longer an option, I was stuck in a rut, and, to be honest, I was starting to feel very depressed. The fact that I was alone myself didn't help. Neither my dad nor my aunt or uncle were present. It only verified what I already knew, that they hadn't contacted me to see how I was doing. They showed no concern. I was simply there, forgotten, and Peter was their golden kid. It seemed as though I was no longer here, except when my dad felt like faking like everything was all right and sent a half-assed text. Here's the problem, though. I knew I had to keep going even though I felt like a complete loser. I was left with no option. I was not going to be able to mope around. I so put in a lot of overtime at that temporary job in order to save what little cash I could. I used to think that I had to accomplish things on my own if no one else could assist me. I was not going to let my father's choice control who I was. I worked hard for a few months until I eventually struck it fortunate. My employer extended an offer to hire me on a permanent basis. Although it wasn't very exciting, the job was steady and paid somewhat better. It was something, and I felt a sense of relief knowing that my life was at least somewhat stable. I didn't have health insurance or anything like that at the time, so the job's perks were really important to me. I thus thought that things were beginning to look up for the first time in a long time. I was still mad at my dad, even if it wasn't the life I had envisaged for myself during this whole ordeal, and in a strange sense, that rage kept me going. I was not going to let failure prove him wrong. Okay, great, if he was willing to wager on Peter. However, I intended to establish myself, even if I had to stoop to get there. I avoided my dad, didn't answer any of his messages, and didn't turn around. If he couldn't support me when I most needed it, I reasoned, I was then free of his need. I was now attempting to solve problems on my own. In the meantime, word got out through the grapevine that Peter was succeeding in college. News on his grades, new friends, and all the college experience that I never got to enjoy were sent to the family by him. And my dad would tell everyone who would listen how much he loved it. It felt like a kick to the gut every time someone told me how proud my dad was of Peter. Even my own father was unable to express his pride in me for managing to keep my life together. But to my dad, Peter was like the second coming of Christ. I was struck with that at that moment. Not only did my parents favor Peter's schooling over mine, Peter was his choice. Clearly, compared to all I had done, he seemed more proud of what Peter was accomplishing. And it stung so bad. I began to think that perhaps my father was not as invested in me as a father ought to be. I quote, "I'm not sure if he ever did, or if as a child I was simply too blind to see it." In any case, it was clear now. I had to accept that Peter was now my replacement. I continued to work hard at my career and made progress over time. I was living alone with a roof over my head, but it wasn't the most thrilling existence. I was okay without anyone's assistance, my dad's least of all. To be honest, that began to seem like a win in and of itself. To succeed in life, I didn't have to attend college. I was demonstrating that you can survive despite all circumstances if you work hard enough. Nevertheless, every time I considered how different my life would have been if my father had given me a little extra support, it infuriated me once again. However, I suppose that's only a part of it. People's decisions about you are something you have to live with, and you can either allow them to define you, or you can find a way to overcome them. Even though I would have to live with that resentment for a very long time, I wasn't going to let my dad's decision destroy me, no matter how painful it was. I was going to keep going because I couldn't let him have the gratification of watching me fail. After several years, things began to shift. Even though I was still a temporary employee, I had earned a position at the warehouse after putting in enough time and effort. I had been promoted to a more secure role, which was something I could be proud of, even though it wasn't my ideal work. I was finally able to support myself financially. Not only living paycheck to paycheck as previously, it seemed as though all of the hard work, sleepless nights, and perseverance had finally paid off. Although I had never given it much mind when I was younger, the work offered some respectable perks, including 2 health insurance policies and a retirement plan. Looking back, this was the type of security I had been longing for. I wasn't becoming rich or anything, but at least I wasn't inundated with bills all the time, and that was a big relief. I felt like I had some control over my life again, which was a first for quite some time. This is when I got to know Haley. To be honest, it was really arbitrary. We met in the break room one day while she was working for the same firm, but in a different department. At first, I didn't give it much thought. It was simply a light conversation over bad coffee. However, one thing led to another, and we conversed more and more till it materialized. We had a comfortable connection, and soon we were dating. I became aware of how much of my energy I had been directing toward my dad's rage when I was with Haley. She was a welcome change of pace. Someone who gave me the impression that I didn't need to constantly prove myself to other people or harbor such resentment. Whether I attended a certain school or none at all didn't matter to her. She simply observed me for who I was, and that felt like enough for the first time. Of course, my dad continued to try to get in touch during this whole ordeal. He never stopped texting, but he only ever sent simple messages like, "Happy birthday," "Hope you're doing well," or "Merry Christmas," "I miss you." But each time I was unable to get the courage to answer. It's not like I didn't consider it. I would gaze at those texts for a long time, debating whether or not to follow through and get in touch with them again. However, I would recall that he never expressed regret or even recognized his actions. And the whole rage would surge back. It's weird since I had stopped battling by then. I wasn't the impoverished youth who had to leave college and take whatever temporary job that came up. I was functioning fairly well, actually better than okay. I had my own house, a reliable job, and Haley, who made everything feel better. However, that didn't change the reality that my dad had favored Peter over me at the crucial moment. Nothing, in my opinion, could take that away. Regarding Peter, I had heard tidbits about him from family members. After graduating from college, he secured employment. However, based on my observations, it wasn't the lucrative profession my father had most likely pictured for him. He didn't seem to be doing too well financially, living in a little apartment with his girlfriend. If I said it didn't feel like some sort of justice, I would be lying. And here I was, the child left behind, and I was outperforming the golden child my father had lavished his whole support on. It wasn't as though I was monitoring Peter. However, individuals converse. He would occasionally come up in discussion with relatives I hadn't spoken to in a long time. They were generally attempting to encourage me to get back in touch with my dad. "You know, Peter's not doing so great," they would remark. "That you speak with your father. He is missing you." However, each time I heard it, it merely served to reinforce my initial decision to maintain my distance. I made my decision, and my dad made his. I made Haley very supportive at all times throughout this period. She never made me feel bad about cutting my dad off or forced me to talk to him. She was the one who really informed me that I owed him nothing. That changed everything for me since, up until that point, I had always felt obligated to forgive him since he was my father. However, Haley made it clear to me that I wasn't in charge of cleaning up the mess he made. That change in perspective has had a significant impact on my attitude to life. I no longer felt as though I was waiting on my dad to change or for a miraculous turn of events that would solve all of my problems. I chose to concentrate on what was in front of me instead. My career, my bond with Haley, and the life we were creating together all improved after that. A few years later, I asked Haley to marry me. It wasn't a large, complex undertaking. We weren't the type of individuals who need a proposal fit for Instagram or a formal dinner. We used to stroll through this park during our lunch periods, and I asked her there. "Yeah, of course," she said. And a few months later, in a modest ceremony, we were married. Just a few family members and close pals. It was flawless. And that day, I didn't give my dad a second thought. We had a basic life together, but it was ours. We purchased a puppy, moved into a respectable apartment, and discussed raising a family. One day. At last, I thought I had succeeded on my own terms. I didn't require my father's blessing or his funds. I felt proud that I had worked hard for all I owned. Naturally, my dad continued to make efforts to get in touch. When he learned that I had gotten married, he texted me and said something like, "I'm so happy for you and Haley." I would have liked to have attended. Again, there was no acknowledgement of what transpired between us, no apology, and it was almost ridiculous in my opinion. It was just him behaving like he belonged in my life from the beginning. I remained silent. I failed to see the purpose. When someone doesn't even realize the harm they've done, how can you allow them back in? The focus has shifted from the money to the collegiate experience. It concerned the fact that he never considered me to be his first priority. And in all the years that followed, nothing had altered. So I carried on with my life. When Haley and I finally felt we were ready to have a family, that's when our son was born. I've never been happier as I am with him. And the first moment I held him, I realized how much I wanted to be the father I never had. Though I'm sure I'll make mistakes from time to time, and I'm not perfect, I can promise my child that he will never feel less important than everyone else. My phone rang a few days after we uploaded our son's images to Facebook. I noticed my dad's name appear on the screen. The universe seemed to be putting me to the test. It felt as though he had seen images of my kid and reached out to me, even though I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. Like with all of his previous texts, there was a part of me that wanted to dismiss it. But I also had an inquisitive side to me. Perhaps this was what I had been waiting for, the instant he eventually expressed regret. Perhaps having a grandchild would let him comprehend what he had lost. I decided to pick up the phone. He said, "Hey, Michael," sounding almost hesitant as if he wasn't sure how I would respond. I remained silent for a moment, anticipating his next move. He went on and on about how much he missed me, how difficult it has been for him to be absent from my life, and how sorry he was that he couldn't make it to my wedding. I just sat there listening the entire time without really experiencing anything. All of the words were meaningless. He then displayed the photos of my son. I looked at the photos of your little son. He is stunning. Michael, I'm quite pleased with you. At that point, I lost it. Feeling pleased about myself, I fired back. Now you're pleased with me? Following everything. You missed the entirety of it. My college experience was not aided by you. You, your own son, favored Peter above me. You're proud of me now, too. There was a heavy quiet on the other end of the telephone. Though I could see he wasn't prepared for that response, I wasn't done. Not even an apology has been made for what you did, I went on, speaking louder. You ignored me as if I didn't exist. You now want to return to my life as if nothing had occurred. He opened his mouth to reply, but I interrupted. What do you know? Peter could actually be your son, Dot. For years, you treated him like one. Perhaps Aunt Susan and you were more than simply relatives. The main reason I threw it out there was to harm him. I was skeptical about it. Not really. All I wanted was for him to feel as miserable as I felt. Here's the problem, though. I thought he would become enraged and shout back to protect himself, Dot. Rather, there was an extended silence from the person on the other end, and when he did say something, it sounded unsure. What are you talking about, Michael? It seemed as though he was having trouble understanding what I had just said. I was surprised at how he responded. I was expecting him to go all out, but for a little while he seemed confused. I believed that I may have discovered something genuine, something I wasn't meant to be aware of. I responded, "Don't play dumb with me," but there was less sharpness to my voice now. I began to question if I had just discovered something more significant. I see that you've always given Peter special treatment. Perhaps that's for a purpose. He paused for a long moment again, and I could hear his breathing as he considered what to say. Dot, that quote's not true, Michael, he muttered to himself. I have no idea why you might think that. However, there was something off about the way he stated it and the hesitancy in his voice. I wasn't so sure suddenly. I had just concocted it. I had said something in an attempt to harm him. However, I wasn't prepared for his response. He seemed genuinely perplexed, but it also seemed as though perhaps there was something going on that even he hadn't thought about. Dot. With that, I was at a loss for what to do. I was simply lashing out because I felt so certain of what I was saying. Now, though, I was unsure about everything. Up until that point, I hadn't really given my dad's possible infidelity with his brother's wife any thought. But this time, I couldn't get rid of the uneasy sensation that perhaps there was more to the tale. You quote, "We're not aware, are you?" Half inquiring, half accusative, I said. Michael, perhaps you've been telling yourself lies the entire time. That's sufficient. His voice now more forceful, he said. That's not what occurred. I have no idea what's going through your mind. I would never harm my brother in the same way because I adored your mother. However, the harm had already been done. The way he stammered over his words, his uncertainty. It caused a doubt to sprout in my mind. I had lost any sense of what to believe. I had misgivings about him. Not after everything. However, there remained a persistent feeling in the back of my mind that perhaps I had discovered something genuine. I murmured, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I am aware of one thing, though. You haven't shown regret over any of it yet. For making me feel unimportant and choose Peter over me, I apologize. He spoke maybe a little too rapidly. I apologize if you feel that way. That was a phrase I detested. I apologize if you feel that way. It was not a plea. It was merely another means to avoid accountability. With a sour chuckle, I laughed. Dad, that's hardly an apology. That's just your attempt to evade reality. He attempted to continue, but I was at my wit's end. I cut him off, saying, Look, I've lost all sense of what's genuine. To be honest, I could care less. You injured me. That much is true. It was not me who made your decision long ago. Michael, I want to put things right, he replied, sounding almost imploring. I want to, but I'm not sure how. In response, I was at a loss for words. I was still in shock at the possibility that my dad and Peter had a closer relationship than I'd ever known. But that didn't erase the fact that my dad had let me down, even if that wasn't the case. He didn't need to be in my life to constantly remind me of all the times he had failed me. I need time to reflect. Finally, I said, I'm not sure if I can put my faith in you. Not after everything. Not that it's impossible, but don't hold your breath waiting for it to happen. Not long after, we stopped the call, and I sat there, gazing at my phone for a long while, trying to figure out what had just happened. Was I really supposed to think my dad had an affair with his brother's wife? Though I wasn't sure, his response had made a way. I was not prepared to enter. I was just certain that the situation was far more intricate than I had initially believed. After speaking with my dad, I couldn't get rid of the thought that perhaps, just possibly, what I had said hadn't been entirely untrue. I began by attempting to harm him by speculating that Peter may be his son after all. Not just my cousin, but also his response. Uncertain. Bewildered. It appeared as though he was unsure of how to reply. And I was affected by that. Maybe I didn't know everything there was to know about my dad after not speaking with him for over 10 years. Is there any chance that what I stated is true? I don't attend family events and I don't communicate with my dad. Thus, solving this would not be as easy as having face-to-face conversations with individuals. Instead, I began to go into my past and consider topics that had been on my mind for a long time. My Aunt Peter's mother used to visit our home on these late evenings. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old at the time. She would always come up with an excuse to check up on us or drop off something. However, it was strange how frequently she dropped by while my uncle wasn't around. I didn't give it much thought at the moment. But this time, those late-night trips now felt questionable. I recall that when she was around, my dad would behave strangely. Like if he were nervous, he would make sure I wasn't around while they chatted, or he would put me to bed early. They would occasionally be heard whispering in the kitchen, but I never heard anything. Everything felt so natural at the moment, talking about mature topics by adults. However, I was beginning to question the true purpose of such discussions. In my mind, the puzzle began to fit together, piece by piece. My father is exaggerated. Partiality to Peter, his unwavering defense of him in every situation, and the fact that he never offered me the same level of encouragement. It had more to do with the financial difficulties Peter's family was facing. Peter was more than simply his nephew, so perhaps that was why. I began searching for anything that might help me see things more clearly. I combed through old family albums, looking for anything that might validate my idea. I even made contact with a few former relatives and gently inquired about the years my aunt used to visit the property. Naturally, I didn't ask explicitly. Nobody had any answers, and I didn't want to raise any red flags. It appeared as though everything led to the same location. I had to figure this out on my own. The more I considered it, the more it all made sense. I recalled an instance where my father went above and above to support Peter, despite the fact that Peter was obviously at fault. As teens, Peter had encountered various problems at school. Not much, but enough to get us both in trouble. My father gave me a strange look. I expected him to be upset with Peter, but he wasn't. Rather, he insisted that I be patient with him and realized that Peter was under a different type of strain. I assumed at the time that he was only trying to protect me. I now view it completely differently, though. A DNA test was not necessary for me to validate my suspicions. In my heart, Peter was my father's son. That was the only logical answer. The years of partiality, the late-night visits, and my dad's treatment of him. All of it indicated the same reality. I didn't sure what to do with it, though, now that I knew. Shall I confront my father once more? Should I be honest with my uncle? I felt queasy at the notion of informing my uncle. He was unaware that the child he had brought up as his son wasn't actually his. I had no idea how terrible that would be for him. Not an awful man, my uncle. He loved Peter as if he were his own, worked hard, and looked after his family. It would shatter his universe to tell him the truth. What about Peter, too? He was also in the dark. He didn't deserve to find out as much as I hated him growing up. He had been living a lie his entire life. None of this was requested by him. The more I gave it some thought, the more I understood that no one would benefit from speaking the truth. It would only make things worse. I've chosen to keep it to myself for the time being. I'm going with that option, even though I'm not sure whether it's the best one. I might tell my uncle sometime. Perhaps I will carry this secret with me until I die. However, I don't think it's necessary to ruin everyone's life over something that happened 2 years ago at this time. The truth won't mend the already damaged connection between my dad and myself. It's a big weight to bear, realizing that no one else is aware of the truth, and that Peter is my dad's son. Telling them that my dad made his decisions and I made mine would be ineffective, though. Perhaps maintaining this secret is how I'm trying to regain control over something that was never truly mine to begin with. I quote, "I'm still not sure how to feel about my father. I can't help but question whether he is even certain that Peter is his son. Perhaps all these years he's been telling himself lies. Alternatively, he could be as ignorant as the rest of them. It It doesn't matter which way it goes. He failed me as a parent. I cannot forgive Peter for the way he treated me, regardless of whether he is his real son. I quote, am content to keep the truth to myself for the time being. It's not my responsibility to ruin my uncle's life or to clean up the mess my dad made. Maybe later on I'll make a different choice. But that's today. Silence is my choice for today. Story 3. Everything was progressively taken away from me by Dad's new family, from my room in the home to my father's notice, leaving me on my own. My dad and I were best friends when we were kids, so we were really close. I ended up living with my mom during the week and spending every weekend with my dad after my parents divorced when I was still a baby. My week's high point was those weekends. We had this adorable little ritual. Over the weekend, we would rent 5 movies from Redbox to Marathon. We used to sneak off to this little-known playground close to the zoo, play soccer, and go fishing. It was unique to us, and I treasured those moments. My dad's romantic life was kind of a revolving door, despite the happiness. Although none of his girlfriends lasted very long, he always appeared to have a new one, excluding one that I truly thought was cute. To be honest, her 2 years on the planet was a record. However, she moved out when I was 10, leaving my dad and me alone again, which I didn't mind at all. But once I turned 12, everything was different. The lady my dad would soon marry first met. When she moved into my dad's apartment with her 2 children, one somewhat older than me and the other slightly younger, things quickly became crowded. My already tiny room shrunk much more. Her daughter's bunk bed and dresser took up a corner when my items was pushed aside. They quickly began hiding my bed in a closet whenever I wasn't around, and occasionally they would even forget to remove it when I visited. I reasoned that perhaps things would improve if we moved into a larger home. Nope. I had to share the room with the younger sister whenever I was there because the elder daughter had a separate room. The younger sister wanted more room for her toys, so my tiny area continued becoming smaller, and my 3 drawers were downsized to just 1. You might guess I began to make less and fewer visits. It simply no longer felt like home. I had the impression that my dad was gradually removing me from his life. The real kicker arrived next. My father impregnated his girlfriend. They were married in less than a year, and I learned of their union only a month after it took place. My new half-sister wasn't revealed to me until many weeks following her birth. My dad gave off the impression that he was completely focused on indulging this new family. In the meantime, Dad stopped providing me with child support, which had a severe financial impact on my mom and me. His spouse, that is, she is unemployed. She just cooks, cleans, shops, and subsists on my dad's income from home. In addition, my dad is paying for her oldest daughter's college education. The younger daughter, who is just 10 years old, is my little half-sister and the epitome of a spoilt child. Even though she is just a toddler, she already exhibits symptoms of being equally spoilt. The customs and experiences I used to have with my father. Now they're only recollections. We feel as though we've known each other for a lifetime, an existence that was superseded by the arrival of this new family. It's as though I can no longer even identify my dad. He appears to be really different. So far from the dad I knew and laughed with in the past. I now find that I spend more time at my friend's residence. She's been really kind, giving me a place to stay if I need it. I just contribute to the cost of food and other minor expenses. With the jobs I'm working, it's doable. To be honest, having a place where I feel accepted is a relief. You know, feeling like an outsider in your purported family is simply terrible. My mom and my stepfather had been together since I was 5 years old. It seems, though, that I cannot recall it. I used to call him Dad. My father informed me that since the man isn't truly my father, I shouldn't love him like a father as a result. That must be the reason I began to act as though I detested my stepdad. Considering how wonderful he had always been to me, I never understood why I felt that way toward him. And I felt so much closer to him in the previous several years. He seems to be the parent I wish my biological father had tried to be. My dad has begun to treat me differently over time. He babbles on to me about his political views and conspiracies involving aliens and other things. In addition, he boasts about his new family and business. Whenever I attempt to discuss something with him, he becomes irritated and ends the conversation before carrying on with his story. He seems to view me more as a friend now than as his crazy kid. In addition, I found out in the last several years that my father's infidelity against my mother while visiting his relatives in Canada was the real reason behind their divorce, not the fact that they weren't meant to be together. By the time I'm 15, I've changed so much from the person my biological father knew. I now like writing, reading, and music more than soccer or the beach. Since 2022, I have written and published 2 novels, and I am now working on the 3rd in my series. My stepfather calls me his daughter and boasts about me to friends and family because he loves and supports me in all of my endeavors. I adore my stepdad's genuine daughter like a sister, but we don't get to see one another very often because she lives up north with her boyfriend. Even yet, I still adore them more than my biological father and my half-sister, with whom I am truly linked. However, my dad accuses me of not phoning him due of his recent behavior toward me. I don't think I owe him anything. Since I no longer feel at ease in that house, especially since the bed I sleep on there is essentially seen as their guest bed in my biological dad's home, I also go months at a time without seeing him. Because of all of this, I am a guest. I hate my father. I haven't disclosed this to anyone, so I'm not being called a jerk. However, I worry whether it's a terrible thing that I am because my dad is in love with his new family. I feel bad for him. Do I look like the jerk? First patch. So I've only gone to my dad's place once since I wrote the first post. It quote, reasonable to say that, in that house, I am just an uncomfortable guest. I should begin by stating that my dad tries to seem all innocent when I don't visit his place for a few months at a time, calling me on Fridays to inquire when he should come get me. He constantly calls me when I'm in class or busy studying, so I never answer, and he calls my mom instead. However, because he never asks, I usually make arrangements with my cousin's pals on the weekends or just spend time writing, which requires concentration that I can't get at his place. I'm now working on my 3rd novel. Well, I'm just going to call him Eric from now on. To be honest, he hasn't treated me like a father figure as much as my stepdad has. In any case, my mother made the decision for me to visit his home. Even though I detest visiting Eric's residence, he hasn't paid child support in over 2 years. My mother says I should just stop by every now and again to prevent him from going to court. She sometimes calls him a deadbeat, which puzzles me, and other times she calls him my beloved father who should be respected. I seldom visit him, so, given the circumstances, I'm very sure nothing would be any different. Then he continues to evade paying child support. He actually once bought a ton of new things for his family for Christmas and wrapped them all up. However, he gave me $200 and said, "Merry Christmas," while I was visiting a few weeks before Christmas. He had driven to Walmart so his wife could get groceries. Spend the remaining money for yourself, child support, or whatever else. The remaining money, which was ostensibly child support, was not even close to what he owed, even though I purchased 2 books with it. I told my mom that I would be better if my stepfather took over my custody and he lost his job. But she feels it's too drastic and maintains that he's still your father. At this point, he merits your love and respect. I went to see him over the weekend, starting from the moment Eric picked me up. He only discussed his new family. He discussed the younger sister's purchasing habits and her relationship with her elder sister. Next is my half-sister, who is now somewhat verbal. I was silent the entire way till he inquired about my school. And he became irate and launched into a conspiracy theory tirade after I responded to his query. For the remainder of the journey, I ignored him. Following that, nothing improved for the remainder of the weekend. In order to avoid having to talk to me, the older sister did what she usually does when I visit. She locked herself in a room and only came out when I left the home or went to the restroom. The younger sister's friend was staying over, and since my bed is where she sleeps when she has sleepovers, her friend had thrown her belongings on it and was sitting on it. My repeated visits to Eric's wife did a lousy job of masking how upset she was. She is utterly stunned. Eric hadn't told her so she couldn't argue, which is why I was visiting. Additionally, Eric spent the bulk of the weekend driving my half-sister and I to a playground so she could play with her friends while I read on a bench. I didn't get much alone time, though, because Eric kept disappearing and telling me to watch my crazy and finicky half-sister. I am not a babysitter, and even while I get along well with kids, it doesn't mean I love taking time out of my own schedule to watch children when it's not my job. I had to talk to my mother about wanting to stop going over there after having to spend 2 days in either complete turmoil or pain. "That's okay," she replied, "and she won't make me go any longer, dot. But I don't trust her because she stated it before. My dad has never been happier than he is right now. And even though I feel like I should be pleased for him, I don't really have someone to talk to about this. The whole thing is worrying me out. I'm at a loss on what to do, so any guidance would be greatly appreciated. I quote, not the jerk. Everyone who has commented on my last article has said, and Eric isn't acting like a father should, but he still occasionally reaches out and says, I'm his baby girl who he loves. To be honest, it makes me want to cry every time he says it, since it brings back memories of our past. Am I exaggerating, or am I thinking too much about this? How should I proceed? Is it because I'm not pleased for my dad because I'm the jerk here? I talked to my mother about my desire to stop being coerced by her to see Eric, my sperm donor, as most of you called him, after heeding the advice that most of you had given me. Longtail, short. She ended up writing Eric lengthy texts, criticizing him for mistreating me and demanding that he pay his child support. However, I'm not sure if she won't still drag me over to his place. When he failed to respond to her, I took other advice and sent him a lengthy text in which I expressed my feelings on the way he had treated me over the previous several years. The problem is, he contacted me right away to scold me for sending that SMS, calling me conceited and exaggerated. He added, I never visit or talk to him anymore, so it's my fault we don't have a relationship. Additionally, he claimed that I was just contacting him in order to get money when I brought up the unpaid child support. That phone call almost brought me to tears, and I ended up simply hanging up on him. He also texted my mother in an aggressive manner, but later that day he left a message on my phone stating that he was having trouble making ends meet. I have no money at all. I'm sure you know I adore you. The problem is, I always watch my younger stepsister post TikTok videos flaunting her Sephora and other pricey purchases, so I know that's a lie. I believe I've had enough. And a few of you advised me to seek my stepdad for assistance. I hope I could. But my mother said something that really broke my heart when I asked her again if he could adopt me. My stepdad seems to have stated that he does not think he should adopt me. Although my stepdad is a really nice and understanding man, he also takes a very aggressive stance and believes that adopting me would be like giving Eric the finger. Additionally, as I saw in the comments on my previous post, there was some misunderstanding on this. He cheated, but not with his present wife, which is why my parents got divorced. Before moving down here and continuing to travel around with different women, Eric lived in Canada after his parents divorced while I was still essentially a baby. He met Alejandro when I was 12, got her pregnant, and married her without notifying me until a month after their courthouse nuptials. Some of you have also inquired about my age. I am 15. I can't really talk to anyone about this stress I feel like I have at my age, which is absurd. My stepdad is constantly working, so I can't talk to him because I'm only ever with him while my mom is there. She often tells me that I'm too young to truly feel how I feel, which is another reason I dislike talking to her. When I tried to talk to my mother about my mental health the last time, she told me that therapists are stupid and that I should simply talk to her or pray to God if I was having problems. I'm not particularly religious, and I find it really awkward to discuss serious topics with her. Despite the fact that she is my mother, I still adore her despite her fierce and scary nature. After leaving me a voicemail, my dad has not been in touch with me. To be honest, I wish to forget about him for a long time. Maybe I'll attempt to mend our connection if he suddenly sees how much of a screw-up he was with me and apologizes. Even though my stepdad doesn't want to adopt me, he still refers to me as his daughter, not only his stepdaughter either, and he really does adore me. His entire family is very kind and caring, and I adore his parents as though they were my own grandparents. I'm simply going to concentrate on my studies and my books for the time being, but I could post another if anything else occurs. Maybe I can finally concentrate on writing my third novel now that I know Eric doesn't actually care all that much about me. I genuinely don't regret dedicating my first book to him. To the father he used to be, I dedicated the book. I don't care that he doesn't think it's clever that I want to be a writer, so it's not like he'll ever read that book. I quote through. I appreciate all of the suggestions and affirmations that I'm not a jerk. Those guarantees make me feel so much better. I'm grateful. 3. Many of you suggested that I speak with a school counselor or do something else. I'm honestly a little too afraid to do it because my mom works from home a lot and I do virtual schooling. I also just don't trust any adult to keep these types of things to themselves, even if I did talk to my counselor without my mom being present. That may seem a little naive and paranoid, but that's exactly the way my brain functions. Many of you also advised me to bring up the therapy issue with my mother once more, but I am certain it won't work. My mother truly doesn't think that counseling is necessary and thinks that talking to God or having her lecture me from the Bible would take care of everything. Even if my stepfather doesn't want to adopt me, I still adore and see him as my natural father. However, he really doesn't assist with the therapy part either, because in order to keep things amicable, he always simply agrees with my mom, however, I'm doing well right now. And I genuinely believe that things will start to improve. And the reason I believe this is that I have a good feeling my mother will eventually want sole custody and court-mandated child maintenance. I suppose I should have made it obvious that when my parents split, they worked out a custody and child support arrangement between themselves. My dad and I have an agreement whereby I spend the weekends with him and he gives my mom $100 a week. I have a strong feeling my dad complied with that arrangement only to maintain his good looks while he completed the process of becoming legally recognized in the U.S. After gaining legal status, he ceased providing child support for his former Canadian immigrant status and started lavishing his new family with gifts. In any case, I spent last weekend at my dad's place. I genuinely decided I wanted to attend because I wanted to give my dad one last opportunity, and this time, my mom didn't compel me to go. We didn't even make it across the street when he picked me up from my mom's place before we got into an argument. I was telling him with excitement about this business concept of mine to manufacture book boxes and sell books with hand-painted bookmarks that go with book covers and homemade necklaces. He was also telling me that my concept was a waste of time and money, not to mention dumb and unproductive. He was becoming political or irate about everything I said, and it took us an hour to get to his house. I informed him that I was considering applying to universities like University of Chicago and Harvard in the future. He started screaming about all of the dangerous immigrants from Mexico and Cuba who were living in Chicago, and he said Harvard was no better than any other college and that attending it was a waste of time. But the reason it's so well known is because wealthy people frequent there. He can't behave so superior to non-white immigrants, I finally yelled at him, as he was once an immigrant as well. In addition, I've never understood why my dad treats Hispanic people with such bigotry. He went on a constant tirade when my mom and his current wife are both Latinas, and I became so tired of it that I actually argued back instead of just remaining silent like I normally do. My father was upset with my attitude the entire weekend. I discussed all of this with my mother. I believe that telling her about a rant was the last straw that ultimately caused her to want sole custody. My father continued talking about how men and women are different. I ended up texting my mother after writing down everything he said and remembering it. She was upset with him, even though I urged her not to discuss it with him. These are a few quotes from his speech. 99% of women desire to be attracted to wealthy guys. Most women are avaricious. I am also oil. Because they are conceited and domineering, males dislike independent, successful women. Respect between a wife and her husband is more crucial than the other way around. Wives should not earn significantly more than their husbands. With a smile, he said, "But you're the exception, lovely woman." Just past weekend, a great deal more transpired. He said things like, "Some of my guy friends don't count as real men," and went on to accuse some of them of being gay. He also attempted to convince me that my summer volunteer position in doctor is unwise, since the people there aren't the same. Despite the fact that my mother's family is from that region. I'm finally done, so I won't go into all of his unpleasant behaviors. He wasted this, his final opportunity. Just to let you know, I'm very certain my mother will no longer be sending me there. She searched for my birth certificate all morning, maybe in preparation for a court appearance. She wants to take me on full-time. My dad owes a lot of child support if he pays it now, so having him assist out financially would be really beneficial for me as I get ready for college. In the earlier entries, I also neglected to include the titles of my novels. I will share the titles with anyone who DMs me, but I didn't share them because I didn't want a lot of strangers on the internet to see my social media tags in the back of the book. If anything else occurs, I will very likely provide another. I'm hoping to provide you with another following our court appearance. Next, the most popular remarks prior to the "you don't deserve this." Parenting and divorce are difficult situations. It seems like your bio dad is a terrible jerk. He is failing you fully and thoroughly. I can see why your mother and stepfather are attempting to facilitate a reconciliation between you and your biological father. One of the things that parents are often advised to do throughout divorces because it's healthier for the children. She may also face consequences if your parents got a court order granting your biological dad weekend visitation rights. If you didn't visit your stepdad at your dad's house until your biological father's parental rights are revoked by a judge, he cannot adopt you. And it would be a problem if bio dad opposes it. Estes' hesitation to take the case all the way to court. It actually makes sense that you are still legally a minor, and I'm betting that has nothing to do with his feelings for you. Every day, he expresses his love and affection for you from his heart. He doesn't have to be your father or adopt you for high dot. He S already there. Don't let his worries about the legal quagmire derail you. You would think he loves you less if he tried to adopt you. I'm happy to hear that your mother plans to pursue both full custody and child support. It's time to hold your bio asshole accountable. I'm so sorry to hear that your biological father was lost. The father he was is no longer, even though he may still be alive. However, you were not the cause of it. He is simply focusing all of his efforts on the woman who will, in my opinion, satisfy his bodily needs and stop there. It's a regrettably widespread issue. Congratulations on your publications. It's really amazing. Since my previous post, I've harbored a minuscule hope that things might finally calm down. Perhaps after all of this drama peaks, things will start to get better. Nope, not even near. Rather, everything escalated to an unprecedented degree of chaos. It began with a revelation that was akin to a kick in the face. I was killing time at my dad's place, which is a big ask for me these days, while I waited for the awkward dinner that would undoubtedly be as entertaining as getting your teeth pulled. I was flipping through some photo albums because nostalgia is a heck of a thing, and what I found almost made my heart stop. You know those old photos of me and my dad fishing and kicking the soccer ball around? Turns out they've been. Yes. His wife's son was photoshopped into my place. Like I was just erased from those memories. It was like finding out you've been ghosted, but in the most literal way. I couldn't let that slide. I confronted him right there with the album in my hands, asking him what the heck was going on, and my dad. Oh man, he actually tried to defend it. Said something about making sure her kids felt like they were part of the family from the start, as if I suddenly wasn't part of that family. It was crazy. His wife jumped into the fray, of course, saying I was making a mountain out of a molehill, and that family isn't just about blood relations, but about who's there in the present. Yes, exactly. I was so angry I was practically shaking. And then my dad decided to drop another huge piece of news right then and there. He casually mentioned he was thinking about legally adopting his stepson. That just about blew my top. He said it was all about securing the kid's future because that's what a real dad does. That felt like a punch to the gut. Hearing him imply that somehow his stepson was now more his kid than I was. I stormed out of there, called my mom, and told her everything. She was livid. By the time I got home, she was already on the phone looking up lawyers to figure out how we could change the custody situation because it was clear. Eric, yeah, I'm just calling him Eric now, had moved on, and I was just an afterthought. But here's where it gets even crazier. My stepsister, who's pretty awesome and has been a real rock through all this, decided to vent a bit on social media about the whole messed up situation. She didn't think much of it, just a little support rant, but it blew up. Suddenly, there were tons of people chiming in. Most were super supportive, saying how messed up the situation was and siding with me. But then there were others who accused me of being dramatic and airing family dirty laundry online. It was wild seeing how many people had opinions on my life, amidst this social media storm. I got a message out of the blue from my dad's sister, my aunt, who I haven't really talked to much in years. She'd seen the post and was shocked. Turns out my dad hadn't been sharing much with his side of the family about what was going on. She was genuinely concerned about how things were being handled and encouraged me to come spend some time with them next summer. She stated it could be beneficial for me to reconnect with that side of the family without Eric's shadow hovering over everything. Honestly, it was wonderful to know that part of my family was reaching out and that they cared. It was a modest silver lining in this whole catastrophe. Now, back at home, things are setting up for a big clash. My mom is talking to lawyers about how to gain full custody and potentially back child support. Because let's face it, Eric's been more focused on his new family than on meeting his commitments to me. It's a lot to digest, and between school and trying to keep up with my personal life, it feels like I'm continuously caught in a storm. I quote, "We've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of chatting with friends and the few family members that are in the loop. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that maybe this whole legal struggle could be for the best. It's evident that things aren't going to change on their own. And if my mom can gain full custody, maybe it'll finally be a wake-up call for Eric. Or maybe it won't alter anything with him, but at least it'll offer me some stability. It's peculiar. You know how everything can suddenly turn on its head even when you believed it was stable? I'm persevering nonetheless. I want to thank everyone for their support and guidance. I feel so much less alone in all of this now thanks to it. I'm making an effort to be upbeat, concentrate on my studies and writing, and simply take each day as it comes. I will everyone on the developments. This is becoming more than a simple family dispute. It's about determining my place in the family tree and ensuring that I'm more than simply a historical detail. Once again, I appreciate your patience. When I have further information, I'll let you know. Since my last post, things with my dad, or Eric as I've been calling him, truly boiled over. When my mother reached her breaking point, she started the process of reshaping our custody agreement and taking care of the unpaid child support that Eric had been evading. Though it also meant getting ready for a legal fight that no one was looking forward to, it seemed like a great weight was going to be lifted. The weeks before the court date were very busy. My mother was frantically compiling all the paperwork and spoke with our attorney nearly every day. I was a ball of anxiety. I had mixed emotions. Sadness for what felt like the formal loss of the dad I knew and loved, and anger at Eric for allowing things to get to this point. The guy who showed me how to fish, gave the biggest applause at my soccer matches, and could never fail to make me laugh with his awful dad jokes. When the day of the trial finally arrived, it was just as stressful and awkward as you could have imagined. It was difficult to sit there in the courtroom and listen to the attorney recount all the ways Eric had fallen short of his obligations. They discussed the unpaid child support, the missed weekend visits, and the impact his behavior, or lack thereof, was having on me. I felt like a character in a courtroom drama program, and there was a lot for me to take in. Of course, Eric was present. Although he appeared to prefer being somewhere else, he was there. When it came time for him to talk, he made a long list of excuses. Money was scarce. He was required by his new family. It was all the same old song and dance, and even the judge wasn't believing it, I could tell. He didn't comprehend how awful things were, etc. The judge had a skeptical expression on his face, and I could practically hear what he was not saying. "Really, dude? All you have is that?" The judge ruled fairly, but firmly. He questioned Eric sharply on why he believed the situation to be acceptable, why he believed it was okay to simply forget about his previous responsible DS and begin a new family. Eric stammered as he answered, and I noticed that he made a few quick glances in my direction, possibly in search of some encouragement or pardon. I just sat there with a mixture of frustration and sympathy. The judge ultimately decided in our favor. Full custody was given to my mom, and Eric was mandated to make good on his outstanding child support payments. It brought relief, yes, but it didn't seem like a winning situation. Something seemed to be coming to an end. One last admission that my childhood father was not coming back. I left that courtroom feeling both very sad and lighter in different ways. My dad was there, but it felt like I was grieving his death all over again. He made an effort to speak with me later and give an explanation, but at that point I was unable to handle it. All I did was nod. Leaving with my mom, I said something about needing time. There was silence for a few weeks. My escape has always been writing, so I threw myself into my studies. My books are selling well, and I've begun work on a new one that is, well, motivated by this whole mess. In a way, it's therapeutic to turn my suffering into stories that perhaps someone else can identify with and find consolation in. Since the court date, Eric has contacted you a few times. In an effort to close the distance between us, he texted and sent a few emails. I have replied, but it is succinct and ambiguous. I'm not prepared to welcome him back. Not entirely. I need this time to heal and discover who I am apart from all of this drama. But maybe one day. Throughout it all, my mom and stepdad have been my rock. More than I could have ever asked for, they have helped me, given me space when I needed it, and just been there. Specifically, comma. My stepdad has taught me a lot about what it means to be a father by action and choice rather than by blood. It's made me reflect a lot on what family truly means and how I want my future to pan out. Regarding this blog, this community has supported me through all of my highs and lows. I'm so grateful to you. Your comments, your support, your advice. It's meant the world to me. It's helped me feel less alone, less crazy for feeling the way I do. I'm not sure how often I'll hear moving forward since I'm hoping to put all this behind me, but know that I'm grateful for each of you. So here's to new beginnings, to moving forward, and to finding happiness wherever we can. Life, "S too short to hold on to grudges or to wait around for other people to change. We have to take the reins, make our own paths, and find our own peace. Thanks for being part of my journey. Here's to making the next chapter a good one."